the theme of my presentation is very far away from what we have already talked about. We have to understand the industrialization in construction and not change the construction as it is. Is this construction, is this sector an industry? What does this mean? Of course, it's a rhetoric, but what we're seeing here is a sector with a very big impact, even though it's not in a big economical impact in Portugal. We can say that it lacks need, and so we have to go back that the product is an industrialized product. Just because it's something that's produced, can we say that it's industrialized? But industrialized means having it be in mass. So many times it's not because it's the result of a lot of tasks. Usually it's independent, but it's still very dependent of manual labor and insight. And many times we get here and we forget that everything that happens in space, it's still very artisanal. I will now talk about a bit about automobile industry. We have to understand the changes that we've had after the industrialization. We have a lot of products that are technological, which is still traditional. Obviously, big constructions such as bridges, streets, there's a lot of machining coming into play. But we can say that they're very mechanical now. But if we have smaller scale, we have it here in Portugal, but also in Europe. And I can talk by personal experience. We have a lot of responsibility when it comes and does. And many times they still do it in a very traditional or rustic way. The first point is the lack of labor. It's not a very popular sector. Because I remember that when I passed through my dad's, we saw that mostly of it's because of all the other points that we will talk about. Because when we contract someone that will just help with the with something, we can just give them a helmet and it's that. It isn't something that's very easy. And so there's a lot of characteristics in this sector that imply us that we have to think a lot, especially those who execute this, because the last product has to be thought about. So such as the investment. the investment changes throughout the times depending on the attractiveness that it is at the time, but it's not a very attractive sector because it's not competitive. Not everything is about salaries, and people and in the future builders are not only just thinking about the salary. Does it make sense for us to put as much responsibility as we do in people who are in the last line of defense? Many times does not people do not want to have this kind of responsibility anymore. They should have very defined parts, and they should consider that they have to be very rigorous and they have to execute it actually well. We have to bring people to the area of thinking. Because effectively, if we think a lot about it and think that in the end someone will just execute it and do it for us, to understand what you need to change, we have to have more a better idea of responsibility. We talk a lot about the industry of the automobile, which has come from 1980. So there's a relation that we have to think about. Being part of the product is just not understanding very well. It's also seeing that what I did will maybe one day be my product. And Henry Ford did that. He understood that if he had people who were happy around him and already had an idea, we could actually solve problems. And people are just not going around going from work to work. And you wanted clients that would actually bring the option of acquiring these kinds of projects. We could talk about a lot of examples that appear in this industry, but that will never change, which because of this constant changing of production and keeping. Because every time that we start a new work, the production will always change. So now I bring you to the answer to construction. Because this is what we all want. Effectively, we can, if we industrialize all the process, maybe we can get further, mostly products and modules. But most of all, we have to simplify the metric from the project to of architecture, the engineering, and the production. We don't need to be constantly thinking what will be the best option. We will think something that will actually work. That is very difficult because a lot of thing has been done. We're looking at a globalization of this area, and thankfully, it is currently changing, and materials get here very quickly. But the innovations are very nice, but we cannot take the risk. So we can just have pile of different options that don't actually work. We have to find something that's as universally as possible. We complain that we have a lack of human labor, but we cannot be always insisting because it's not an option. We have to insist a bit though with what we already have and what we already have at work. Even the modules, they're very simple. Maybe we could do them another way. we could use better use what we already have and change as we have, work of what actually we actually have a guarantee. There are some challenges of construction. We have logistics and transport, which just the other architect just said, because we have to understand that it's important, and we understand that this can serve a purpose instead of having to create two lines of production with different ways of producing. But this also involves the mechanical part, which is already done in aerospatial and other areas that already see this as cheap. I didn't put negative thought towards construction, but I think it should be. I think it should be not taken lightly. We can't do much about this. This is something that's already cultural. It's easy to just give our responsibility to someone else. So there's techniques that we have for materials that in the moment are already controlled. It's completely different from applying it in a building. So even if it's difficulties that this industry has, there is the necessity of space. So this forces us to understand the building, to actually have a range of options. But that implies a lot of space, and we do not have space for everything. We have space for some things and not for the others. And just to end this area, we don't look to build something of worse quality. We'll look to do something better. Some examples of construction, which is pedagogical. There are some things that are already done for some time, but if you looked for a few years ago, it would be very different. This is very true because I really like to give this example. So when we think about the door, it is something industrialized, but we usually don't think of it that way. There are multiple solutions, and all of them are welcomed. But this one will be mainly focused on modules of kitchens and bathrooms. It's something that I've already done. And before going to this offsite part, making it outside of the building and bringing it in. It was in I was involved in a project with where they wanted to make a base of life that wasn't just pre-made, and they wanted it to be made with fast and comfortably. Most of all, be able to change the structure and be able to repeat it. But also changing is something that we didn't talk much about here. It has to do with the buildings. They have a kind of skeleton. And with all the solutions, we can start thinking of a question of recycling the buildings after 10, 15, 20 years. Make them more plural, make them more free. Make it be able to move things and change their shape. We have to understand that cities are constantly mutating and that is part of construction. And at the time of this project, we have to look at this in a way of modulating it. And how can we use it? There's another part that we have to talk about. Always, when we recycle, many of the materials may not be used. We had three options: wood frame, a panel with a sandwich panel, so we really have to calculate these kinds of things. And so if I want to reutilize it, especially when you look at the automobile industry, the more components that something has, the easier it is to then reuse them. And we have to understand that tomorrow we have to have a building that can have multiple ways of being used. So Porcelanaza gave us a few informations. I was involved with them recently in the question of offsite since 2019. For those who don't know, it is a ceramics, but now they have a bigger range of products. And they decided to throw themselves into this area. And I'll show you a video, which is a fabric it's a company that's very clean. This kind of having the robots, it's something that's just in the early stages. This is the new space. And here we're seeing the making of both kitchen, bathrooms, and other places. And so you can see that's very big and grand. So this doesn't mean that the future is here, but the future is in this idea of thinking outside of the box. So even the quality of the product is better. And so that's this notion of something that's already being made. And so they started commercializing these kinds of options. We have done more than 1,000 copies of this. They've already been commercialized. I'll just allow you guys to watch the video a bit more. So you see the transport area part. It has to be optimized because the question of dimension. So we have to work with them. I think it's something that's challenged, but no one is against these kinds of things. So Marabat is the name that they gave to this kind of modules. They can be produced in wood. The only difference that Porcelanasa has is, and no one is wrong or right, is that Porcelanasa does not make a catalog. They create products that adapt themselves to other kinds of questions. Everyone has to their kind of questions and understand if it's something that's good or not for them. And even the construction companies, they have to find ways to optimize themselves, not do the whole module, but do some amount of components. And it's easier to get human labor in these kinds of cases. Here is an example of how we can use it, adapting to spaces. We see the different parts that actually explain how we do it. It's been the early stages and the end. And here it's an example of the similar to DST and what they're doing. This kind of solutions do adapt. They can even adapt to something that may often be a challenge, because it's way easier to make 50 of these instead of one that's traditionally done. Someone can just get this and just adapt their house. They have to be less heavy. They have to be thought about when actually putting them in. It's nothing new, but it's something that is becoming more real and more frequent. The question of prices are still a bit elevated. But there's also a lot of equations that we have to start doing to understand. So if I ask someone else to just say the price of a bathroom, they say the price of the materials and the labor. But in this case, if I was the promoter, I know perfectly how much I'll pay in comparison to something that takes a year and a half. It changes here a bit of a way how we do things. It's just to do financing and everything else. So it's not something extraordinary. It's very simple. It's the structure. It's just a kind of a grid that is not very far away from the structural panels. And how those panels allow for an infinite way to treat the acoustic part, especially in terms of pressure. In a catalog, these are some of the examples. That can help change the building and make it more flexible and accessible. Even if the pieces are different from one another, even for the person who's doing the project and as a certain metric, we know that even if we do the pillars different, It's not now that just because it's industrialized that the panel has to be changed. It's a fallacy. It has all the needs that every single thing has. It's a material that has been done with the most rigor as possible. And here we have an example of we have some few examples here where we can see the window in the middle of the floor. And so I knew how it works, and in terms of execution, this area was only 3 months to make. So they are able to do 50 bathrooms per week, but to put them into the building, it would be about a month. So all this obviously implies that there's a lot of preparation, a lot of work. We have to bring the architects and engineers together before we do whatever we need. And so that's why I really like this phrase, which is nothing is less productive than make efficient something that should have been done. We'll not make the Lego, we'll just give it potential and see what we can do with them. And I say thank you to the attention.